Okay, so to not steal too much time from the presenters who have prepared carefully for this session, let us just start. My name is Helvig Hauser from the University of Bergen in Norway, and I'm very glad that I have the chance to chair this session about two state-of-the-art reports, which I guess are quite different, both very interesting to attend. The first, in a way, is a meta survey, if I may call it like that. Maybe it's even an instance in a series of meta surveys. And so at next EuroVis we may expect a survey about surveys of surveys. Let us see forward to that. But up to now we are at level 1 of this hierarchy, and so Bob and Liam, they will present a survey about survey papers in information visualization. And we do it like that Bob is starting, and then we can have 1 or 2 questions after Bob's part before we move on, just to get ourselves a little bit in a different mood. And in the end, we will have, of course, more questions. And so, please, Bob.
Thank you very much, Helvig, for that great introduction. Before I jump in, I'm just going to give 2 pre-announcements. Well, thank you for being here, for making the effort. Firstly, there are 2 or 3 big boxes full of water, so if you're feeling like you're going to pass out from the heat or something, you can grab a water there. And the other pre-announcement is really kind of just silly, but I just feel I have to tell you guys this. Helvig is my academic father, and therefore Liam is Helvig's, one of Helvig's academic grandchildren. I just had to get that off my chest. Not everybody will. Somebody might find that interesting. Okay, so this is called SOS, a survey of surveys, mapping the landscape of survey papers and information visualization. So I will give the first half. I'm Bob Laramee, and then my colleague Liam McNabb will give the second half. So when Liam started his PhD, which was just last year, we thought, it would be nice to do a survey related to smart city visualization, right? Because that's an exciting topic, like exciting up and coming topic. But then I noticed, there is already a survey in smart city visualization. It's already been written. So then we thought, okay, maybe we just need to be more specific. Some special aspect of smart city visualization. And then I said, okay, why not a survey of visualization techniques for transport, like public transport, cars, buses, trains, planes, and so on. And I said, but before we do that, we have to make sure there are no surveys on that topic already. So I asked Liam to look for that. And he comes back the next week and he says, look, Bob, I found this survey of visualization of transport methods in public transport. I was really surprised. I said, okay, maybe there's something else we can do. And then we tried for visualization of human motion. And we looked for an existing survey, and there was a problem. Somebody had already covered that in a survey. And so it just was very natural, okay, it's time to do the survey of surveys. It was thrust upon us. I think a lot of people in information visualization and SciVis have been talking about this for a number of years now. Everybody knew it was going to happen. It's not a new idea. It's been circulating for probably 5 years or something. And yeah, so it was just a matter of time before somebody got around to doing it. So here is a little overview of part one. So we're going to talk about challenges, right? Literature-based challenges, writing surveys. We're going to talk about the search methodology we use for the survey of surveys, or the SOS. We're going to talk about SOS classification. And actually, we're going to introduce a meta-classification, a classification of classifications, which I'm sure you're all wondering about. We're going to talk about the scope, what's in this SOS and what's not in the SOS. And we're going to just look at a few examples of surveys. We're not going to look at all of the surveys. Just as a fun little quiz, so when we started, as one does on a survey, you never know exactly how many papers are going to fit in that survey. And the same is true about this one, the SOS, and EuroVis. Does anybody just want to guess? Like if you were going to write an SOS in EuroVis and you had to guess, I wonder how many survey papers there are in EuroVis and visual analytics. What would you guess? 50. You know, we're psychically connected, because that's what I thought. I thought, there's probably around 50. Well, I'm going to leave the suspense now, so I'm not going to answer that right away. And then, of course, we're going to have questions and answers about part one, and then Liam is going to talk about part two. And I purposely am not giving you a preview of part two to also add to the amazing suspense. A little bit about search methodology. So these are the places where we looked for survey papers, right? We looked at, and starting in 2014, one of our favorite EuroVises, that's when the state-of-the-art reports track was introduced to the EuroVis conference. So we looked there, and we included 20 survey papers. We looked in the IEEE TVCG journal. We looked at Pacific Biz, because we found surveys there. We found surveys in the VAST conference right before it turned into the journal publication, and still there's a conference track. We looked at the Eurographics conference, right, where we found, actually, I think just one. Did we? Oh, we found 3. Okay, approximate. Actually, there's some uncertainty in these numbers. They're not exact, because we kept finding some surveys right up until the day the camera-ready paper was submitted. And look, there's some fun ones in there too, like the Journal of Visual Languages and Computing. So you may have wondered, like, where did people publish their survey papers before the EuroVis conference came into being, and these journals? That's where we found some. So that's an old journal with some survey papers from the 80s, in case you're interested. Computer Graphics Forum, and for completeness, ACN Computing Surveys. There's a journal called ACN Computing Surveys, and we found 0 visualization surveys there. Yeah, which is interesting, right? At least I think it's interesting. And this is a little bit outdated. I think we found 89 surveys total. And we were finding them really until the day before the camera-ready deadline for the SOS. So how do you classify the surveys? So this is a nice little picture of the classification, but in reality, I think we were talking about the classification and refining it for like 9 months, something like that. Just discussing it, making sure things fit together. So it's not too surprising. We should have thought of it faster. So this is, on the x-axis, it's a modified information visualization pipeline. Right? It starts with the data phase, the raw data, the data enhancement, then there's a visual mapping phase, and there's a rendering style kind of phase, and then there's the human-centric phase that involves interaction and perception, so no big surprises there. And then we have sort of subject clusters, and these are typically the same subjects you find at a conference where the papers are grouped together into different things like data-centric papers, survey papers, for example, text data. There's typically a multivariate visualization session, a group of papers at a conference, right? And that encompasses a lot of different subtopics, graphs and networks, no big surprise there, geospace and time, coordinated multiple views, right? All of our favorite topics, essentially. And then real-world applications, so to speak, like finance, healthcare, security systems, SOS, frameworks, and then overview surveys. And you'll find that I'm reading some of these things because I know that they're hard to read on the slides. So I'll read some of those things. And we also preview the classification because when I show the table, the overview table, it's very difficult to read the small font on the overall table. So the scope, what is included are referee conference survey papers and referee journal survey papers, and information visualization and visual analytics. Right? So there aren't that many surveys and visual analytics yet. And they should be refereed, right? What we do not include are the SciVis surveys. So all those things we call SciVis. We don't include computer vision, graph theory, and computer graphics. Those are all sort of neighbors of information visualization, and that's to keep the scope manageable, so that it just wasn't possible to keep the project manageable and include more. We have sort of focus surveys and context surveys, if you will, right? So there's a focus on the time frame from 2010 to the current, to 2017. And we also have the context though, so we included in the overview table every single InfoVis or visual analytics survey we found, but we don't go into any detailed description of the ones that are not in focus, right? And there are papers that sort of look like survey papers. They're not really survey papers, but they may compare lots of different methods with each other or lots of different things to each other. They're included in the table, the overview table, but not in the focus region, so to speak. Okay, so that's what the overview table looks like. And I'll just briefly mention the colors first. So those surveys in green are the main focus in the SOS. And they typically appear in our favorite places like Computer Graphics Forum, EuroVis, the main Viz conference, so to speak, and IEEE TVCG. And then we have yellow survey papers, which we wish we could have included in the focus, but there just wasn't enough space. So the SOS is almost 30 pages, and we had to make some compromises in terms of limitations on space and managing the project. So those are shown in yellow. And then we have pink labeled surveys, and those are before 2010. And I'm going to try a very risky interactive. Well, what I really want is a interactive magic lens focused on context visualization. I will zoom in here and see if that helps. Right, we have our data enhancement and transformation surveys, the visual mapping surveys, exploration and rendering in this column, and interaction and analysis, and perception, right, that are hard to read along the x-axis, and then we have the subject-based clusters along the y-axis there. And we can make a few observations already if I actually show the table and I don't go to a different slide by accident. This is the risk with the zooming in on Adobe. So we can make a few observations, like for example, the text surveys. Text, in my mind, Datavis started around 2005, at least that's how I perceive it, but yet there are already something like 10 Datavis surveys. And so it's really interesting. And you see some ones that are very old. There's a survey paper from the 80s in here. You'll see some other things. For example, I think most people know that, but there are lots and lots of graph surveys already. So beware. And then you find something like 5 geospatial. I had no idea there were 4 surveys already on coordinated multiple views, and so on. You can find your healthcare surveys in there, some security surveys, system surveys. Look, lots of software visualization surveys. So some of the earliest ones are on software visualization. And I think I just spotted that one from 1986. Yeah. So it's interesting, and I hope we all have a chance to look at that. So this slide is controversial. It's not in the SOS. I'm just speculating. I'm doing a speculative, very uncertain exercise here. I just thought it would be fun. Maybe you guys think it's fun too, but at least I think it's fun. So we have approximately 89 surveys. I just wanted to get some numbers, some more interesting numbers and data. These are estimations. This number, 105 references per survey, is a rough estimate. So I just took 10 of the surveys and averaged the number of references. I didn't average all 89 surveys. And the average was 105 references per survey. This is where it gets the most uncertain. So there are 3 uncertainty tildes here. So I just guessed that of those, 50% are redundant. That means they're cited in more than one survey, and each survey has roughly 50% unique references. If that's true, there are approximately 4,700 unique references. And if you guess something like each paper is about 10 pages, right, another estimate, you get something like 47,000 pages represented by the SOS. Again, that's a very, very rough, hand-waving, speculative estimate, but I think at least the order of magnitude is correct-ish. And if you want to count in books, like for example, that could be 94 books if each book was 500 pages. And when I think about EuroVis starting in around 1990, it seems to be pretty logical. And the surveys span these time years, this temporal. We had a classification of classifications as one does, super surveys like this, right? So in the surveys, we looked at each classification and we classified those classifications because that's one of the really important aspects of survey papers. Then we have survey papers that do something called a unique mapping, and that is where every paper in the survey is classified uniquely in exactly one spot, right? So these are subject descriptors or categories, the C's, and the L's are typically the papers themselves, the literature reviews themselves, right? And in these configurations, each piece of literature appears exactly once. And we have other kinds of classifications with these kinds of configurations, like two-dimensional, one-dimensional, and hierarchical. Here we can have something we call a one-to-n mapping, which means that a paper appearing in the survey can appear in more than one area. It has multiple characteristics that are appearing in more than one area, right? Here's a checkbox style list, right? And then we can have a simple listing. This is a two-dimensional matrix style configuration, and this is a sort of a list style, and sometimes the styles are hierarchical as well. And that is a very difficult to see classification of classifications. So each survey paper is on the left, and then the characteristics of the classification used in that survey are on the x-axis. For example, the dimensionality of the classification, 1D, 2D, or 3D, the structure, if it's linear or hierarchical, the mapping schema used, so we could use a direct mapping schema in the classification, a unique mapping schema, or a 1-to-n schema, and indirect, I should say indirect as well. I know that's too difficult to see because the font is too small, so I encourage you to look at the PDF. And how much time? 2 minutes-ish. Here's one of the surveys. And when we looked at the surveys, we focused on 3 characteristics of those surveys. One was the concept behind the survey, what conceptually are they trying to do. The other thing we focused on was what kind of literature classification do they use, right? And then we also focused on the future or unsolved problems part. So these were the 3 aspects we focus in on for each survey. This is a survey, a taxonomy of visual cluster separation factors and scatter plots by Settermeyer et al. And the image is quite small, I do understand, I can't say that. And they group the papers by visual separation factors in clusters. So these are within class factors, so those are distinguishing between data samples belonging to the same cluster. And then they have between class characteristics, so these are distinguishing visual properties amongst multiple clusters to make them distinguishable. And as future work, this is something we call a 2D indirect mapping. So it's two-dimensional, right, x and y axis, but you can't see the survey, the papers explicitly. You have to place them implicitly in that table. And the future work includes extending the current taxonomy, which is a logical area of future work. Here's another example, just one more before I stop. This is a sample multivariate viz survey, so it was the first parallel coordinate survey, which we all appreciate, from EuroGraphics 2013. One of the few EuroVis. No, it was EuroVis 24. The one in Leipzig. I think it was the one in Leipzig. And the classification is hierarchical. It's an indirect mapping, right? And we can notice, for example, that some of the categories are appearing twice, right? Like axes is appearing in 2 different leaf nodes. Samples is appearing in multiple leaf nodes, and so on. And they mention that evaluation is a big future work direction. Okay, so that's the end of the first half of the SOS. Any intermediate questions before we proceed to part 2? Question in the back?
Speak up loud.
Any ideas with regard to surveys about visualization tasks? Because your structure was about the data. Anything about tasks?
Yes. So we do have that, right? We have that There are surveys on tasks, task-related information visualization. And they're in the SOS, and Liam seems to be indicating that maybe he's gonna touch upon that. Any other excellent questions? So we'll have offer another chance to ask questions after Liam has given his half.
So then we take questions after the second
Yes.
part, Liam, then it's your floor.
So I'm McNabb. I'm going to talk about the second part of this survey of surveys. So Bob went over the motivation behind the survey of surveys. He discussed the taxonomy we used, the classification, and he gave some sample surveys. I'm going to go over a couple more examples and talk about some of the results we found and some of the analysis we did. So the first example we have is a graph survey by Velo et al. Visualizing group structures and graphs. So I picked this one because it's quite interesting in a couple of different ways. Before we go into that though, it's a 3D hierarchical unique mapping, so as we can see each paper here, it's a bit hard to see, so I've added an animation here, just we've cropped it in half. So you can see each paper is mapped here. Based on first or second, where first and second are based on if it's the primary focus of the paper or the secondary focus. And on the top, we can see the group structure taxonomy, which is actually a 2D matrix in itself, disjoint flat, overlapping flat, disjoint hierarchical, and overlapping hierarchical. And on the y-axis, we have a hierarchical technique taxonomy that's broken up into different segments. So one interesting thing about this survey is the use of icons. So these icons depict what each point in the design space focuses on. I feel like they're pretty useful for surveys. We tried to implement them ourselves, but they didn't really work. So that's something to note. If you're making a survey, you can try these out. They don't always work out, but it's always useful to try. Secondly, what's interesting about this survey is that it has an extension. So we found roughly 5 to 10 surveys actually extended their survey to include new papers, new taxonomies themselves, and new results. So we have included them into our survey, but we haven't had duplicates for the focus in order to make sure we didn't duplicate any results. So next we have a real-world application survey sample. So this is a survey on visual analysis approach to financial data by Co et al. And they have a 2D 1 to n mapping. So on the y-axis we can see the papers. We can also see the year above it. But we decided that that wasn't necessary for the table of classifications. That's why it is still not hierarchical and it's linear. We can also see it's 1 to n mapping. So I believe this is a better understanding of the classifications we were discussing earlier. So we can see this paper has 2 cells added on the y-axis, and I'll discuss that in a second. So what's interesting about this paper is that it uses Camp's technique taxonomy. So I'm just going to read the paper. I have it here. Infiltration or informational visualization and visual data mining by Keim. So this looks at different display types. So from top to bottom, we have standard 2D displays, standard 3D displays, geometrically transformed displays, iconic displays, dense pixel displays, and stacked displays. And that's quite an interesting paper to look into if you're trying to do a survey. The other interesting thing is that it actually has multiple tables in the paper. So for this one, we look at the displays, but for other tables, they have other attributes, such as the data types for this one, financial data, such as transaction data and stock data. So those are the only examples I'm going to go over to keep time short. Now we're going to look at a meta-analysis. So as Bob said in his presentation, we're going to focus on roughly 40 papers in order to keep within our scope. So here is our first visualization. So this is a visualization of citation data. On the y-axis, we can see all the different papers here, and those are classified based on the classification topics. And on the x-axis, we have the year range of the citations. So this is actually the references rather than how many times it's been cited. And we can see how many citations is actually used in its paper based on the color. And what's interesting about this is how far it goes back. So the range is actually 1886 to 2017. So that's roughly 131 years of range. And this isn't just one-off. There's a couple that go all the way back to 1929 30s. There is one from 1886, which is a parallel coordinates paper. It is French, so I'm not going to speak it because I don't know French. And this, let's have another look. We have geospatial here, and those talk about the hand-drawn cartogram drawings. And it's quite interesting and quite nice. I've read a couple of surveys in my time, and these surveys are normally the most interesting because they look into the kind of history of the techniques and how they used originally, and I think that's quite nice to know. So if you're making a survey, that might be useful. Okay, so I'm going to move on to kind of the primary focus of our paper. So this was what papers have been made and what papers haven't been made. So we're going to start with what papers have been made. The whole survey looks over that, but we thought it'd be a bit nicer if we tried to make it a bit more interactive, a bit easier. And we came across SOS. So SOS is an online literature browser created by Beck et al. And what it does is we just map all the survey papers using BibTeX, and that allows you to interactively look at it. It is at the URL sos.swansea.ac.uk, which you can see at the bottom here. And it's quite useful to easily find papers that might interest you. So we have the keywords on the side for this example. I've just decided I want to look at interaction-based papers in text-focused region. And we can see there's 2 papers in that region that fit both those keywords. We can also see on the side there's a distribution of all the papers that we found within surveys. And more interestingly is that text-focused papers are really only found past 2010, which is just an interesting thing to notice. So I'm going to move on. So next we're going to look at stuff that hasn't been looked at. So for each survey paper, they usually have a future work section at the end. So when it came to our future work, we decided, well, we're just taking surveys and putting them in a survey. Might as well take the future work and make it our future work. So we categorized all the future work that is in every paper, and we found the most used frequent open research across this paper. So across the 40 total papers, does anyone guess what are the most looked for open research areas? Close. It's actually, well, maybe not close. It's up there though. Evaluation was the top answer, with 50% of the papers citing it as important open research for this survey. So this is a kind of grouped together with different kinds of studies. So stuff like use case studies, design studies, qualitative, quantitative studies. That's quite interesting. We kind of thought that there might be a link between that and the amount of perceptional studies we found. So in our focus, we only found 2 papers in that specification which were Johansson and Forsell's paper on parallel coordinates, and Fuchs et al.'s paper on data glyphs. So it might be useful to actually start using those studies in order to allow people to see them, and maybe that will reduce the amount of open research needed in that. Maybe not 100%, but quite a little bit. Next we have missing scenarios. This is a case-by-case basis. So each classification normally has a design space of some sort, and 40% of these papers said there was stuff that needed to be filled out in those classifications. So this is especially useful if you use our online literature browser, as this is one of the keywords you can look in. You can just decide to look at a topic, then you can add the keyword missing scenarios, and then you can find missing scenarios over a bunch of different surveys in a particular topic that you're interested in. Next we have scalability, so that's the ability to scale data for performance or just readability. We have interaction techniques. Again, self-explanatory, so that would be interacting with the visualization for different reasons, such as focus and context and filtering. Next we have the extended data dimensions, which was mentioned by Helwig. So this would be extending the taxonomy or just adding new dimensions to the techniques themselves, such as high-dimensional versions or multivariate versions. We have tasks. So the interesting thing about this is that this is specifically talking about other survey papers. So there was 20%, 1 in 5 papers looking for taxonomies of their survey papers. And we actually had a talk earlier today by Kennedy and Karacha. And that paper was constructing and evaluating visualization task classifications. So, with these two helpful presentations, hopefully more people will start using or creating task surveys. So tools is a grouping of different tools that were asked for. So automated tools, generic tools, user-specific tools, and those can be found online. Using our literature browser in order to break down. And lastly, we have fuzziness and uncertainty, which is visualizing error. And now we have another classification here, which just repeats what I just said, slightly to the side, which is what the x-axis is on the right side rather than on the top. But you can see distribution, and a lot of them cover all their bases, so good for them. Yeah, and we'd like to thank everyone who helped us. That'll be proofreading, helping us find errors in our paper, or finding more papers. It might not have been fun at the time, but it was useful to make sure we had everything in the end. And that's it. Any questions?
We have in fact some good time for your questions, so just shoot. While you're thinking, maybe I can start with one.
Yeah.
That is expected, I hope. So I would like to challenge you, like the lessons learned in terms of how to write a good survey. I mean, today morning you mentioned it. Now we had a very nice presentation by Jesse Kennedy that already gave us some insights.
Yeah.
What would be your recommendations?
They discussed kind of the how to attempt it from the beginning, and we looked at everything that was already completed. So we have the difference. So I have personal preferences based on what Bob showed in the classification. So usually I like unique mapping for the most part, unless you're looking at techniques. I think techniques and data types are some of the only reasons to use one-to-n mapping. Otherwise, you can start going into multiple tables, which I don't think a lot of people do enough. So we had 3 different tables within our presentation or within our talk and our survey. I think that's a much better way than trying to cram 5 glyphs into one table.
While you are raising your hands, I ask a second question. That is,
Can you shout, please?
I had the impression that you are using state-of-the-art report and survey maybe interchangeably, and I assume that many of your references are one of the two kinds.
Yeah.
But they are not necessarily the same. So how do you see those two categories?
Bob, do you want to take this one?
Maybe you Bob.
Yes. We generally. Hello? No? Okay, yes. We didn't make a very careful distinction between survey papers and state-of-the-art reports. So they're pretty much, this could have been, a survey of surveys and state-of-the-art reports. So we don't make really a careful distinction. And that was, we wanted to be we wanted a project that was manageable on one side, but we wanted something to be inclusive on the other side.
No, that's fine, but I think they serve different purposes, at least in my understanding. So every 10 years I need a new state-of-the-art report, but I may not need a new survey, right?
Yes, yeah. So yes, we don't really make a careful distinction between state-of-the-art reports and survey papers. Little retentive people do that.
Can you shout?
Yeah, definitely. Just a comment on the many references to evaluation in future work. I think a lot of those are just alibi references, because people sort of promise to do evaluation, but then never actually do.
Yes, it's an easy way out, so to speak. If you're not sure what to put in the future work section, you just put evaluation in there. Yeah.
But maybe if there was a perception study, they wouldn't have to do that. A perception survey, maybe the basis would already be covered. So.
And just a side note, a very, very blaringly obvious future work direction is a survey of surveys and scientific visualization. So if anybody's interested in that, please talk to me, because I think that's a very interesting topic. Yeah.
So this might be a question that's not really a topic of your talk. But you can observe that we have more and more surveys appearing in our field all over the place. And what is your opinion about, so when is the topic ready for a survey, or can you also have too many surveys? So sometimes I have the feeling there's a new survey or state-of-the-art popping up every second year. And so what is your opinion about that?
I can give you my opinion. Do you want me to give mine first, or do you want to give yours first? So that's a great question, and the SOS is really to address that question. So if you're trying to decide, should I write a survey paper on this, please consult the SOS, because the SOS shows things like there are 10 TextVis surveys in the last 5 years. So don't do that. At least for another few, another 5 years or something. And same with the graphs, right? We had a massive number of graph surveys appearing all within a 5-year time span. So that's kind of the idea here. And it took us over a year, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe something like 14, 15, 16 months of searching and searching and searching for survey papers. So we put a lot of effort, and I hope that benefits the community, all that over a year's worth of searching for survey papers, so that we don't just keep regurgitating the same things, and we look for things that topics that are really interesting. Does that sort of answer the question?
Sure, I'm just thinking about this topic a lot, and then also asking a question, so how high should we put the barrier for somebody to write a survey paper? Because if you write a survey paper which is not perfect, you kind of block the space of service papers for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And,
that's challenging too.
I think it depends how much is happening in a particular field, right? If it's a very active field, then after a couple of years it would be good to wrap up what has happened. If it's a quiet, long tail development, then maybe not. So.
I kind of mentioned this in the second part, but a lot of these survey papers are starting to create extended surveys where they just update them. And if you know of an odd papers that they're missing, maybe just contact them and be like, maybe we should update this together.
Yeah, I think maybe a solution would be kind of a living survey. It's kind of a living document on the web where everybody could kind of add new papers. Maybe there must be a review process for people to allow this, but then just...
Yeah, so we have talked about that, and we did discuss briefly that people could, contact us with their survey papers and we put it up on our literature browser. But I don't know if we plan to do that
Forever.
Yeah. It is not open source right now, but if someone created an open source version, we'd be happy to kind of pool our knowledge into it.
Maybe I ask a last question before we get ready for the second presentation, and that is, I mean, you showed us some visualization of the references within all the services. What about the citations? I was expecting that you would show us some visualization of citations.
So we did make some extra graphs. So this one actually looks at the citation plot of them based on Google Scholar, and we just reduced it down to the different topics. So what we found is that if from survey papers before the year 2010, they seem to have a lot more citations as you do with growing. But out of these topics, actually 50% or more of them had a positive trend past the year 2010. And this might be because they're new topics for surveys or not, but this is a general positive improvement.
Okay, so let's thank both Liam and Bob.
Thanks for being a great session chair. Which brings us forward to the